Hi there. Hi, thank you. Thank you, everyone. My name is Alan Dixon from Amiqus. I'm a principal consultant at Amiqus, and we're a recruitment company that focuses on video games in that sector. And the question we've got here is flexible working options. Is it the key to hiring during a talent shortage? So I wanted to give a bit more of a high-level overview to, first of all, what is flexible working and what does that mean? And for me, remote working comes under the spectrum of flexible working options. I feel like on one end we have the hybrid working model where you might be in for 2 to 3 days in a studio and the remainder of the week you'd be working from home. And you also have fully globally remote right at the other end of that spectrum where people can work in different countries for a company or a studio in a completely different area geographically. And I think the most common that we have is fully remote within a certain country. So Ella, for example, is, fundamentally Studio is a great example of a company that hires fully remotely. We also have something that we call mostly remote. So some studios within the UK will have a role that's mostly remote where that person wouldn't be expected to be in every week, but might be expected to visit the studio once a month, twice a quarter, once a quarter, something like that. And it tends to be quite flexible. With globally remote working, obviously you have to factor in things like time zone differences, management, and the employment contract. That definitely has a different impact. It can have tax implications, it can have legal implications if you don't have an entity in the country where the candidate is based, or you have to hire them as a contractor. So there's all these sort of different options. And then within that spectrum as well is the 4-day working week, which is not as common as remote working or mostly remote working, but definitely is still something that is part of the conversation. And what I want to talk about is with flexible working is the benefits to you as an employer of remote working. So the first and the topmost sort of benefit to me is you're able to attract a wider and therefore more diverse candidate pool. This is time and time again, it's a fact that the more diverse the workforce, the more productive, and the better the product at the end of the process. And it's undeniable that offering a flexible working option, whether it be remote, fully remote, or hybrid option, enables a more diverse cast of candidates to be able to apply and feel comfortable applying for that role. In the recruitment space, you definitely stand out amongst your competitors, the people that you're competing with to recruit, if you can offer fully remote. In most job boards, there's an option to filter the jobs by ones that offer remote working. So it's definitely a high priority. We see day to day, and we've done research that tells us that remote work is one of, if not the most considered option when people are looking for a new job. Time to hire is proven time again. Here at Amiqus, we've got data that tells us that time to hire for remote roles or companies that offer remote options is much quicker to hire people. So if you have a role that is on site three days a week, the chances of recruiting that role is still strong, but depending on how technical or how specific or how senior that role is, the time to hire can be significantly longer. We're talking of up to 4 times as long. You're also going to be able to talk about the talent that you've currently got. You're going to be able to retain talent and increase and maximize their sort of employee well-being. They're going to feel valued if they are given the flexibility to work remotely, mostly remote on a hybrid basis. All these options definitely lead to helping with not only recruiting, but retaining the talent that you already have. You could also, on a more commercial sort of sense, you could also save money on a non-existent office, a smaller or more flexible office space. And this might help you just with, various things like cash flow. So that's what's in it for you as an employer, as someone who's looking to recruit. But what about for the people that you're employing? What is in it for them? Why do people want to work remotely? So we've done an analysis on this. We've done a survey, and the key thing is better work-life balance. An average commute can be up to an hour. That's 10 hours a week, 40 hours a month. That is a significant amount of time that people are unpaid for that they're now recouping because they can work remotely if they work remotely full time. Alongside that, you get reduced commuting costs, and then obviously you get that time back. And time management, if you've ever commuted within a city, that transit can be unreliable, or it can be affected by strikes. That then chance of people starting late or being on a bit, anxious about getting to the office on time, that's immediately just, it's gone. Traditionally within games recruitment, I've been in games recruitment for 10 years, and relocation has always been a big factor of a career within video games. Remote working wasn't nearly as half as popular as it is now, or frequent. So relocation was kind of an understood part of a career within video games, if not domestically, then as well as international. The property market, inflation, cost of living crisis, mortgage rates, the appetite, all these things means that the appetite for relocation is the lowest I've ever seen it. It's almost zero. In my experience, in the last sort of 2-3 years, people are only relocating because of an external factor, returning home, ill family member, something like that. So getting people to relocate to your studio means that, not having to get people to relocate to your studio means that you can offer people that remote work, that they don't have to relocate, and they can avoid that huge life-changing decision. They can consider your work and the games that you're working on without having to upend their life totally. Going back onto the diversity issue, people want to work remotely because often the primary caregiver, flexible working hours are often seen as absolutely invaluable to anybody that is a primary caregiver to a dependent or otherwise. More often than not, that is mostly spread amongst the female contingent of the population. So offering remote is absolutely invaluable, and in terms of diversity, it's kind of the biggest element that I think that you'll see, biggest impact that you'll see. And people who give that care and who have other things outside of their life that they absolutely cannot negotiate on time-wise, working remotely is absolutely invaluable to them. So I don't want to cover too much of the same ground that Ella did, because I thought Ella's talk was actually really fascinating about the interview stages, but I wanted to cover quickly how to recruit and effectively screen a candidate without meeting them. So some of the pitfalls of a remote process, especially to people who are not used to it, processes on video call can often feel very transactional and quick. Video calls are often, they lack that sort of vibe, that feel to an in-office or an in-person meeting. They're often quite focused, so it doesn't allow for that sort of kitchen chat, coffee cooler, water cooler chat. Or if you think of a previous or pre-pandemic interview, you would have been met at the front door, taken through to the kitchenette area or something like that, meet a few people on the way. You might see someone that you know. You lose all of that with a video call. So it's about trying to acknowledge that and understand that thing is missing. So a couple of tips. So too many or frequent steps can be tiring and repetitive. So as much as we want to create a good interview, don't like for like replicate an on-site visit. They don't have to meet all 20 people within the studio to be able to make a decision. Always ensure that more than one person is interviewing at in any stage. This helps avoid someone being viewed with conscious or unconscious bias, as Ella said earlier, and it also helps just generally add another dynamic to a video call. A conversation via video can often be very Q&A, and having another person in there, ideally 2 or 3, really helps the conversation feel a bit more richer and flow a bit easier. Avoid having more than 3 people. People are intimidated by panel interviews, and on a screen, it's very difficult to keep track of sometimes who's talking and where you should be looking and things like that. And people get disengaged. It's quite easy to get disengaged. To avoid having it as a transactional Q&A type interview, always have the interviewer do your research, make time, acknowledge that you won't be able to get to know this person with just general chit chat. Make time within the interview to talk about nothing to do with the interview. Assess the person first, then the skill set. Ask them about their family, about what they've been up to, talk to them about anything but work, and really just try and get a conversation going with them. Try and recreate that chat from the front door to the interview room as if we were on site. That's the kind of the thing that I would be looking to build into. But Ella has actually described it perfectly well. I was going to talk about building in a stage or a time for them to talk to someone from a different discipline who wouldn't typically be in the process to discuss the role. So Ella said, they're not involved. They get the team to play a game with the candidate. I think that's absolutely brilliant. That's a perfect example of a stage that recreates that kind of company culture. What's it like, without actually just asking someone, what's the company culture like? It just gives a chance to people be together, to be distracted, and let their sort of true selves come out and get comfortable with one another. And yeah, absolutely, you know, it reduces that anxiety around starting as well. So that's a couple of tips on how to recruit people, how to assess. There's some more tips there. I think Ella's covered them really fantastically well, but yeah, hopefully that will help. So some challenges. Remote working is hugely popular. It's overwhelmingly popular. You will recruit faster, and you will get more diverse candidates and just a higher volume of candidates. But what are the pitfalls? What are the challenges? So our research tells us, and anecdotally too, that graduates and more entry-level candidates, there is a huge appetite to work on site with them. They feel that they will learn better that way. They want to be amongst the games development studio. It's often been something they've worked for a very long time, and they don't want to typically do it in their bedroom. They want to be in the mix. They want to be around people that they've looked up to all the way through their academic career or otherwise. Another challenge is that new starters can feel really isolated if their onboarding isn't carefully managed. So again, going back to Ella's talk, I thought that was really interesting about how they get people onboarded, how the different stages, the different things they ask them to do, the checklist. That's great. If you want a really good example of what to do, of what good looks like, go back to that screen. I think that's really useful, especially if you're recruiting people on a remote basis. We're seeing a lot of companies now who have a studio presence, who offer fully remote work. They're looking to get, especially entry-level people, but also their leads and leadership teams, especially around the creative disciplines, into the studio of some description. So in some way, or in some level of frequency. So it's not a one-size-fits-all resolution to any issue within the studio. But I do think there still is a big appetite for people to work on site. It just has to be managed, and I think it has to be acknowledged that remote working isn't for everybody, and that there are people that will want to come into the studio and be a part of that culture. Again, just harking back to Ella's discussion, there's often a lack of, sometimes with remote working, there can be a lack of learning by osmosis, those over the shoulder, at the desk chats, coaching, mentoring, informal mentoring, and you can also lead to a lack of culture, corporate memory, and kind of a bit of a stale working environment. So that isn't a destination for everybody. That's not going to happen if you acknowledge it, and if you think, okay, how can we avoid that situation? The things that you can do is company away days, events, conferences, make sure that everyone's attending and that you build in time to spend time as a team in person. I know Future Lab, they have a studio in Brighton, but they also have a lot of people working for them remotely. They took everyone to Centre Parks recently, which, I mean, aside from the huge bill they must have got for Centre Parks, I think that's, you know, a really good idea, because it also included their families. So in terms of, you know, building that rapport and building those memories, that's really important. If you can't or won't offer remote, I think it's not for everyone. There seems to be still some companies that just don't offer it full stop. They offer some flexibility, typically hybrid working. But the question I would put to you is, really own why that is. And that's going to lead you down two routes. One route is going to be a more of an inward, difficult conversation with yourself and leadership team of, there's a lack of trust around the team or around the way you do things, and there's a lack of security in the knowledge that you can do the same things you can in person as you can remotely. And if so, then those need addressing by the leadership team, and it can be a difficult and maybe uncomfortable conversation. But if you own it in a really positive way, so you have a culture that is insanely creative, it's very visual. I know, for example, there's some things that have to be done in person, mocap, animation, some animation, audio. Really own what the benefits are of coming into the studio. Is it mentorship? Is it career progression? Is it learning and development? Make sure your studio is worth going into. Okay, if you can't offer remote or flexible, then really acknowledge that and kind of make up for it in another way. You can also build in further flexibility around hours, the time that people have to work, duvet days, being offered to offer that flexibility and acknowledge you're not offering remote, I think is really important. you can also look at things like the 4-day working week, which, you know, that needs a lot of consideration and study. But again, it's something, if you can't offer fully remote, if you want to be competitive with those who can in terms of recruitment and retention, it's definitely worth looking into. You also might want to consider helping with commuting costs. And if you do recruit from the wider UK or European or global market, you must offer a full relocation package in terms of financial assistance and actual operational assistance and moving and things like that. So yeah, quite a broad view on remote working and flexible working. It takes many forms. There's a huge appetite for it. There's a lot of really, really good positives. There are some negatives, some pitfalls, but they can be easily avoided. And if you don't offer fully remote or flexible working options, really understand, really reflect on why that is and try and address those issues. Or if you absolutely can't offer remote or any remote, try increasing that flexibility. Acknowledge that that is a part of the working landscape in 2023 and beyond.
Thank you so much, Alan. So much in there. If anybody wants to watch these back, they're all going to be up on the Ukie YouTube channel. So I'll share them out to everybody who's attended today, and you can watch all these back and pick up any tips that everybody sent in. There's no questions here, but one question that I've got is, you know, what are you seeing with people recruiting? Have you seen a drop in remote roles, or is it still pretty much on the same level?
No, we've not seen a drop in remote roles. No, absolutely not. We've just seen, I think, some studios were offering remote, and then they've decided that they wanted to bring people back into the studio, which has led to retention issues, which then they've come to us and said, we need to backfill these roles. So no, the remote roles are absolutely, it's a feature to stay for sure.